Good afternoon. My name is Alex Imes, Executive Vice President at the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. I want to welcome you back to the NOVA Economic Development Alliance's 12-part webinar series, Beyond COVID-19, NOVA Business Resiliency. I would like to take a moment to thank our partners, including the 10 jurisdictions of the NOVA EDA and the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. You can find all the webinar programs in this series on the NOVA EDA website at novaeda.org. In our second webinar last week, we focused on funding and financing in depth and received insights from business, government, and nonprofit leaders about how to survive the immediate impact of the ongoing economic crisis. Today, we're going to take a deeper look into staffing considerations in the COVID-19 era. We hope the information shared today will help you make the right calls for your businesses and your employees. We have an outstanding panel of leaders with us today, and I'll now turn the program over to our moderator, John Jacobs, to provide a weekly economic update and lead our webinar discussion. Thank you.
Great, Alex. Thanks very much, and welcome everybody to this third in our webinar series. We began, I guess, that would be 3 weeks ago. We try to do these every Thursday, and to remain consistent. Let me just put my screen on here, and I'll give you folks a bit of an agenda so we can review that together. Just a moment. Here we are. Great. So, Alex, thank you. I am John Jacobs. I'm not the moderator for this session and the moderator for all the sessions of the series. We have a great panel today, and this topic is never more timely than at this moment. We'll be hearing from Manish Malhotra, Chairman and CEO of Unicent, Patrick Hyland, Director of Research and Development at Mercer Consulting, and Agata Nguyen, Director of People Operations at the Humane League. I'll just want to note that we will be taking questions throughout. So please, there at the bottom of your screen is if you mouse down, you'll have a nav bar and you'll see Q&A. Please go ahead and start populating questions as they occur to you as you go through the presentations. And after the presentations, we will start going through the questions, as many as we can get through in the time allotted. As I do each week, it did give you a quick weekly review, a quick update from the prior week. As you well know, over $500 billion in COVID-19 business relief funding has been approved since April 3rd. This includes the $310 billion in the second round of the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. $181 billion of that second round of the 310 has been already allocated, according to the Small Business Administration. 47% of the total PPP applications have been approved. This was for a survey recently by Fortune magazine. That's a significant improvement of the percentage of successfully approved applications from the beginning of the period. This week marked the return of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate to session. There is therefore the possibility of additional funding and relief that could be forthcoming. Unemployment filings since mid-March, that's 7 weeks. As of today, it was announced we've reached a 33.5 million unemployment filings. This is up 3.2 million from last week. The April 2020 jobs report will be released tomorrow by the U.S. Department of Labor. And so there'll be obviously more detail there. As I noted last week, in the first quarter of this year, the U.S. economy has contracted by 4.8%. This was released at the end of April by the Department of Commerce. Total coronavirus cases as of this morning, according to Johns Hopkins University, worldwide 3.8 million. This is an increase of 600,000 over last week. U.S. cases 1.2 million, an increase of almost 250,000, and U.S. deaths 73,431, an increase of 12,342 from the same period last week. I've had this consistently, this last bullet in the update, because it's certainly germane to this conversation. From a Gartner research survey on April 14th, 81% of the U.S. workforce is working remotely, at least in part, a survey of HR managers. So, onto our panelists. We have three great panelists today. Manish Malhotra, Unicent Chairman and CEO of Unicent, Patrick Hyland, Director of Research and Development, Mercer, and Agata Nguyen, Director, People Operations, the Humane League. let me just, we'll go to Manish first. And it's just a little bit background on Manish. Manish has over 22 years of technical and management experience in the IT industry. His company, Unicent, is an advanced data analytics company based in Virginia. Under his leadership, Unicent has grown from a startup company to an Inc. 5000 honored company. Manish is also president of TIE-DC. It's a nonprofit entrepreneurship organization, as well as being a board chairman of both the Center of Innovation Technology, CIT, in Herndon, Virginia, and a board member of the Virginia Innovation and Entrepreneurship Investment Authority. So I'm going to ask Manish to start sharing his screen, please, and take us through his observations and what he's been focused on over these last several weeks in particular. Manish? I would just need your mute button off, if you would.
Yes, thank you. So I'm sharing my screen now. I hope it's visible to everyone.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you again, John, for the kind introduction. I'll just speak a little bit about myself. First of all, thank you very much to the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority to have me as one of the speakers and panelists for today's event. As John mentioned, I run a local small business, government contracting business called Unisant Inc. We are based in Herndon. We've been in business for about 14 years. In addition to that, I'm also associated with some organizations, including TIE-DC, and I'll talk about some of these organizations later in my presentation. And then I'm also on the board of CIT and IEIA. So just a correction, John, I'm not the chairman of the board for CIT. I'm just on the board. I'm one of the board members. So a little snapshot about Unisant and what it does. And this will probably flow into how we as a small business have been dealing with the current situation we are all in. All small businesses are in today. So Unisant, like I said, has been in business for about 14 years. We are a small business certified government contracting company, mainly focused on the health, federal civilian, national security, and financial services sectors. And the areas of focus include data and advanced analytics. Actually, that is where we started the company initially, more on data and advanced analytics. And since then, we've grown into IT modernization, cybersecurity, agile engineering, and cloud services also. On the far right, you can see some of the customers that either we are serving currently or we have served in the past. 90% of the portfolio of Unisant is health IT. So, we kind of pride ourselves of saying that we are a health company, health IT company, and also very relevant to the current situation we are in. Some of the services that we are providing are very, very relevant and very timely, in these unprecedented times. Having said that, let me just approach this topic of, how Unisant has been handling the lockdown. Pretty much from day one, when we went into lockdown and when things started unraveling, we took a three-pronged approach to the in general with the company. So first and foremost, we were worried about the customers because we knew that we were all going to be remote, right? The entire workforce, entire Unisant workforce, which is about 150 strong, we were all about to go remote. So we were worried a little bit about how do we now have a good touch point with our customers. Then something to do with employees, and I'll cover that, and then in general in the community. And this was something like we've been doing from last 3 months almost. So from a customer's perspective, and this might be relevant to other small businesses or other businesses in the area. Now I will a small disclaimer: Unisant is a government contracting company, and we have not been impacted as much as probably other businesses in the area, like the local restaurant owners and other small businesses in other streams. GovCon has been very fortunate in general. Most of our programs were allowed to go remote, except some DoD programs. But then for the most part, immediate impact was not there. However, we do know that there will be impact going forward, and we are already seeing that. So from a customer's perspective, we made it a point that almost every week we were doing an outreach to our customers. We were reporting on our program performance, pretty much over communicating about delivery to our customers, and making sure that everything that we are doing for our employees as well as for the community, we let the customers know about it. And to our surprise, it was received really well. In fact, we've heard back from some of our customers, and they've responded to some of the email communications that we've had with them much more than we used to have, in the previous months. So it has been very, very good from that perspective. And that's very important, because unfortunately, customer intimacy at this point is at near zero, right? We are all remote. So it's important for them to keep hearing from us, keep hearing about the workforce and how we are performing at the utmost levels remotely also. Now, from an employee's perspective, this was something very, very important to us as an organization. Unisant in general focuses a lot on its culture. We are a culture-first company. So first and foremost, we made sure we were doing regular outreach from every level in the company, including myself. I have been sending emails to all employees, and we pretty much the first time when the lockdown started and we had our first call or email was sent out, we made it very clear to our employee base that we are not going to lay off or furlough anyone, no matter what. So even our front desk person, she's still very much engaged, however we can use her, we are using the skills, right? Then we made sure everyone understood that we are here for them. We made flexible working arrangements, even remotely. So, some of our programs were already remote. Many of them are working remote for the first time. The challenge is not only with people, employees who are working remotely for the first time, but also for the folks who were already remote, to our surprise, because now they also have their children at home, right? There are no schools. So even they found themselves in a very different remote working environment. So, obviously we told them that we would be very flexible. However, we need to make all the arrangements. And the next point, we've been very, very open, and we've emphasized this again and again, that we are here to talk to each and every employee, or whenever needed, in terms of their physical, mental, and emotional well-being, because that's very, very critical at this point. Engagement and keeping the employees informed has been very, very important to us. So given that, in the next two slides, I'll tell you how we kept the engagement going, right? And then I'll also cover the community efforts in terms of TIE, DC, and CIT in the following slides. So moving on, one of the first things we did in April itself, so we went down in lockdown around March 16th. That's when we announced that the company was going remote. And immediately in April, first week of April, we announced initiative for all our employees, but then we had a two-prong approach with that. One, we told all the employees that we're going to give them $30 a week credit using a platform called Grubhub. We actually signed up with Grubhub as an enterprise partner, and that they could use this money to buy any food order out from any local eateries, right? Now, we did emphasize the fact local, because again, we had two things in mind here. One, we'll give a break to our employees, at least even if we are giving just $30, and this was for all the employee base, right? It was more like, okay, they get a break once a week at least, right? And then they also order from their local restaurants who are really in trouble. So in a way, we were thinking this would also kind of infuse some dollars in the local communities. And to our surprise, this program was very well received by the employees. When I had sent this email out early April, a lot of our employees responded back with very, very positive sentiment. Oops, let me go back. So here, now, what we also saw, because we had the Grubhub dashboard, on an average, the employees were ordering about $75 to $90 a ticket, right? Which means they were adding their own funds to the funds that Unisant was provided, and all that money was going to the local business community, which again was, to us, this was a huge success. The other thing we did after, in April itself, I think end of April, we did another initiative. This time what we did was we signed up with a local organization called Seva Trek. So if you don't know, Seva Truck was founded by Sonny Khakkar. He is a local GovCon CEO, a very, very well-known leader in the local community, in the GovCon community. So the Seva Truck, what it does is every day, day after day, they serve hot meals to underprivileged communities and other areas, schools and regions, certain regions and all. Unisant partnered with Seva Truck, and we partnered for multiple weeks to sponsor one full day of meals. And again, what we did was we signed up with Seva Truck and let all the employees know that we were doing that. Again, to our surprise, this was very well received by the employees, and some of the employees started donating directly to Seva Truck. Now, we had sent them all the links and everything, what they could also do. So this was, again, a huge initiative from our side. Along as we were doing all these, we were also keeping our customers informed that we are participating in these initiatives. And the customers in return were telling us, this is again good, because as a small business, we are thinking about the community and about the other small business and all. Now, with my approach with some of the community organizations, because I sit on board of certain not-for-profits and all, I was also able to fortunately engage some other business leaders to sign up with Seva Truck, and that's how it kind of became a chain effect. And now Seva Truck is pretty much running every day. They've been running every day in any way, but we were able to at least do a little bit from our side to get them sponsored for a couple of more days a week and all that. So with that, my last efforts were, from a Unisant perspective, were with the organizations that I'm associated with. So first is Thai DC. So for people who do not know what Thai is a local, we have a DC chapter. It's the full form of Thai is the Indus Entrepreneurs. It's basically an association which has a number of business leaders from various organizations that come together. Overall, at a global level, we are about 15,000 members, and we have about 65 chapters and pretty much a number of countries and all that stuff. So it's a fairly global organization. So since I am the president of Thai DC, what we did was, as an organization, along with the other board members, we started doing educational webinars, and we made them all free for the business community, small business community. Things like how to manage growth, how to think about growth or risk management in these times, how to manage liquidity of the business in these times. We have some upcoming events. Actually, May 28th is our next event on startup mentoring. So what we've done is we've collected a bunch of 20 senior VCs, local leaders from very large businesses. We are bringing them together as mentors and matching them up with a lot of startups, because today the startup community has also been affected really bad because of what's going on. So we're kind of bringing them together, and we're going to have breakout sessions in that event where the startups will be able to ask any question in full privacy to the mentors that they get assigned to. We have another event coming up, Leading in Crisis, and we've signed up a very senior author and leader, Steve Farber, who's going to be doing that event for us in June. Now, on the other side, I'm also associated with an organization called CIT, that is Center for Innovative Technology. So some of you have probably seen the building. It's an upside down building when you're on the Dulles Toll Road. That's CIT, basically. One of the things that CIT is chartered with is to fund, early stage startup companies. In return, as we fund these startup companies and we bring more funds into the ecosystem, these companies go and hire more people and create high-paying jobs. Now, obviously, from a CIT perspective, we had to step up. So here is what we have done from a CIT perspective. First and foremost, at the very onset of the lockdown, we made about 900,000 in equity investments in startups. That was around March timeframe. Then we provided about $500,000, $500,000 in contracts to companies and universities, education institutes, right? Because they have been very adversely affected with what is going on right now. May 28th, we are again getting together as a board, along with our president of CIT, Ed Albrigo, to approve almost $2 million of technology commercialization grants to small businesses across the Commonwealth. There are a number of startups that had applied. The selections have been made, and there will be approvals made on May 28th, where we will be funding about $2 million in the ecosystem. So in summary, I know I'm probably out of my time right now, but in summary, one of the things that John had asked me is to provide advice or recommendations. Honestly, I'm a small business just like you all, so I'm in no position to provide advice. What I can do is showcase what I personally have been doing, or Unisant, the company I'm associated with, has been doing, and maybe you can walk away with some takeaways, good takeaways. So as an employer, in summary, right, we have been focusing a lot on employee morale and continuing to focus on the company culture. We've been having regular communication with all our employees. We actually have an all hands meeting later today where we've invited the entire company to dial in. So, we've made flexible workaround arrangements. And now definitely one thing we are doing is, as we get ready to come back to work, which will be the new normal, as everyone is saying, we are making sure we are developing a very, very a comprehensive guide for the employees as to how they can come back. We are getting ready to provide them masks, gloves, whatever it takes for them to feel safe and secure to come back to work. As we open up in the Commonwealth, as the businesses as the businesses start to open up for regular business. Now, from a business leader or an entrepreneur perspective, again, we have definitely tried to engage with our customer base significantly. We are trying to solidify our partnerships, because we believe when all this ends, those things will come in very handy for us, right? Because the customers will remember us. We've ensured highest levels of customer service. Again, focused on program delivery. My entire leadership team is very focused on making sure anything, whether it's right or wrong, is communicated back to the customers immediately, right? Being creative and being very flexible. So, one of the things we did from a growth perspective, we are also looking for opportunities in this situation. Now, we are a health ID company, so we responded to some RFPs or contracts that came out to support the local hospitals and all that from a COVID-19 perspective, right? So there are opportunities that are getting created in this tough situation also. Now, one thing that we've done is Unisant has declined the PPP loan, because when we evaluated, yes, initially we read everything, we were getting ready to apply for it, but then when we saw that our cash flows were okay, we did not want to dip into this loan, right? This is for true small businesses. So as a business leader, if you think you do not need it, you should not go for it, because someone else will lose that opportunity. And lastly, if you are a business leader and if you are in a position to give back to the community, please do your bit. That is very, very important for all of us at this time to come together. So with that, that's pretty much my presentation. I'm going to turn it back to John. So John, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Manish, so impressive to hear what you're doing, what your company is doing, not only your personal involvement, but the other organizations, CIT, the nonprofit side, to really fill the void during this really difficult time. And you make both references to the financial side, but also the human side, and trying to get us to bridge to tomorrow. So thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for your presentation as well. Next, I'd like to invite Patrick Hyland to speak. Patrick, Director of R&D at Mercer Consulting. Patrick has over 20 years of experience in organizational research and consulting. At Mercer, he works with a wide range of clients and industries globally. He's currently conducting research on personal engagement, partnership cultures, senior leadership team effectiveness, and thriving at work. Patrick is also a lead researcher at the Engagement Institute, which is a community of over 100 senior HR managers and human capital professionals. And this is a joint effort between Deloitte, the Conference Board, and Mercer's Sirota. So Patrick, if you would please share your screen and take us through your presentation.
I will. Thank you, John. Hold on one second as I get this set up for everybody. And as I do that, just bear with me a second. So I'm trained as an organizational psychologist, and what's so fascinating is that everything that Manish described is both textbook and innovative. I mean, it's really a wonderful example of how to handle a crisis well. What I want to do over the next 5 to 10 minutes is walk you through what we are seeing across organizations in terms of the employee experience and the way that organizations are responding to this pandemic. If you don't know who Mercer Sirota is, we are part of Mercer, but Sirota is the branch of Mercer that focuses on the employee experience. And what we do are mostly large-scale employee surveys, small, medium, and large organizations around the globe. And what I want to do is share with you some of the data trends that we've been seeing over the last couple of months, and it might help put in context what you're seeing and experiencing in your own organization. So you can see my screen, right, John?
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Let me start just at the global level. So in January, Mercer started to conduct a survey of senior leaders and HR professionals. I'm going to walk you through some of that data, because I really do think it provides this big picture understanding of the impact that the pandemic is having. A series of questions focused on how the pandemic is affecting organizational operations. And if you look over on the left, what's so interesting is that we're seeing this almost bell-shaped curve or split. You know, what we find is that in the upper right in blue, 27% of organizations are saying, this is having a minimal impact on our organization because we are able to send employees home and work remotely. And we've seen, as John opened up, that 80% of employees in the US or 80% of organizations have been able to essentially make their workforce remote. Down at the bottom, 46%, so about half of organizations say that the pandemic has had a moderate impact because some employees still need to work on site. And then you can see over on the left in pink and red, 27%, if you add those two percentages together, are really significantly impacted by this because their workforce is largely on site. And also in upcoming weeks and months, I think we're going to see more and more organizations start to think about and actually bring their workforce back. So really planning for that next phase of this pandemic is going to be really important. Over on the right, you can just see some common responses, but obviously such a big event. Now, beyond operations, what we're seeing is that COVID-19 is really disrupting a lot of important people practices. Just to highlight a couple of the statistics, senior leaders, 43% said that because of this pandemic, they've delayed onboarding. 36% say that they're having a hiring freeze across all roles. 24% have become more liberal with their sick leave policy. They're essentially saying, now is the time to use your sick leave without restriction. Down in the bottom, we see some of the pay implications. 14% have decided to reduce executive salaries. 11% have delayed merit increases for 2020, and 9% have implemented company-wide pay freezes. You may be wondering about layoffs. You may be looking for that statistic. You know, what's so interesting is in this survey that started in January and has been running real time since, we're finding only 5% have actually laid off employees. Now, we're obviously seeing a much higher percentage. John talked about those layoff percentages just over the last 6 weeks, but obviously that is a big part of the employee experience and what employees are worried about. segueing to that point, so the first two slides I showed you are really from the point of view of senior leadership and senior HR professionals. But when we talk to employees and we ask them about their experience over the last 6 weeks, what we're seeing, as you would expect, is quite a bit of concern. Over on the left, this is from data that we conducted back in mid-March. And I think if we were to ask this question again right now, we would actually see even more elevated levels of concern. What we found mid-March is that 9 out of 10 employees were at least moderately concerned about COVID-19 and the effect that it would have on either them or their family. Over on the right, this is actually new data. This is a survey we have live going on right now. And what we're asking employees to rank order are essentially these 16 elements or concerns. And what's so interesting is we're finding that the top concerns at the top of this bar chart are really about family safety and economic impact. Job security, which Manish talked about, was one of the first things that he addressed, is also a big concern. We were surprised to see that family, it makes sense at one level, and at another level, it was a bit surprising. But really, when you talk about the employee experience and employee needs, it really seems to be around, if you remember Maslow from your undergrad or grad school days, really seems to be that Maslowian hierarchy. We need to make sure that our employees feel safe, that their families feel safe, those basic needs are being met, and then we can worry about things like performance and motivation and engagement. To get a better read on the employee experience, we asked some additional questions, and I'm going to show you 2 pages of this. And I think that these 2 pages show what organizations have done well so far as this pandemic has unfolded and where the opportunities are. So on this first page, these are the places where we're really seeing organizations do a good job from the perspective of the workforce. I know it's a lot of data, but if you look across these items, the story that seems to emerge, at least to us, is that over the course of the last 2 months, organizations have really done a good job of communicating with their workforce and providing kind of that support, the basic needs support around health and safety. 8 out of 10, in fact, employees in that second line item feel that their organization is taking the right steps to support employees during this outbreak. So this really seems to be the good story, that organizations have really done a good job of communicating, making their workforce remote, taking care of those safety and security needs. So where are the opportunities? Well, when you look at the rest of the items in this brief survey, here we're seeing scores that are more muted, more neutral, and in some places more negative. And again, it's quite a bit of data to digest, but what we see and what we headline up top is that, particularly in those bottom 4 items that we're showing you here, it seems that employees have concerns about dialogue, and you see that in this question, third up from the bottom, my manager is doing a good job listening to my concerns and feedback during this outbreak. And also we're seeing senior leaders are more muted on those 2 items. So there seems to be this opportunity for all of us to listen to our workforce, particularly as we start to consider and think about bringing them back from their remote settings. And also what you see in the bottom 4 items, the other 2 seem to have to do with help and social support. These are not terribly low numbers, but when we look across all 14, these seem to be the opportunities that most organizations have. We've done a great job communicating, taking care of the safety needs of our workforce, sending them home to work remotely, or providing them with safety and security if they're still in the office. But we do have this opportunity for dialogue and social support, some of the psychological aspects of the pandemic. What this means is that it really is an important time for us to be listening to our workforce. What we found in that survey that I started to showcase is that only 17% of organizations have gathered feedback from their workforce about COVID-19. And there are so many ways for us to dialogue with our employees. It doesn't need to be a survey. Survey is not always the right option. Just simple manager-employee dialogues, digital focus groups, open-ended surveys. What is important now is to make sure that our workforce feels like we are listening to them and we are responding to their needs. It's one of the best ways to create a sense of social support. And Manish really talked about how effectively his organization has been doing this. And I think that that's why he's seeing and he's sharing this very positive story of the workforce feeling supported. This listening element is critical. The other thing we really need to think about is where our workforce is now and where they're going to be in upcoming weeks and months. You know, most organizations have been effective in this first triangle, responding to the pandemic by focusing on the physical safety of their workforce, crisis support, and creating a certain sense of work stability, making sure that people are able to get their work done. So that's the first step, and that's the good news. But what we really need to start to think about is that return phase. And again, as we move to the return phase, we need to center on safety, support, and stability. It's going to look a little different. We need to make sure that we can return our workforce into the office safely. And Manish talked about how his organization is planning to do that. We really need to be providing support around coping, and resilience is going to be increasingly important. We need to make sure that our leaders, managers, and employees know how to stay resilient. And there are specific ways that we can do that. And then there's probably going to be a reinvent phase for many organizations. This pandemic has disrupted so much about the economy and the way that we live and the way that we work that many of us are probably going to have to reinvent the way that we service our clients. And so that's going to require safety, support, and stability as well. It's going to be different, but we need to center on these three themes. So if you are looking for something to center on as leaders, these are probably three good things to think about at each iteration of this pandemic. Just a couple more slides. So what would this actually look like? A lot of detail on this slide, but I think what's important, the point we're really trying to make is that as we approach this next phase where we're starting to bring our workforce back, it's really a good time to be listening to our workforce. You know, if you're thinking about bringing your workforce back in a month or 2 months, now's a good time to reach out and see what their concerns are, see how comfortable they are, see what they need and want to feel like they can return safely. Because if their needs aren't met, they're going to come back into the office and they're going to be distracted and productivity is going to decline. So we really need to make sure that we're understanding what their concerns are. Once they come back in the office, we also need to check in and see how's it going. You know, after that first or second week where your workforce is back, it's really a good time to check in and say, is this better than you expected? Do you have any concerns or anything we need to address? And then following that, in a month or two after you have the workforce back, you can really start to think about how you can reinvent the way that you work, and if you need to, reinvent the way you go to market. So really, as I sum up, I think that what we're seeing across organizations is a good initial response. Most organizations have gotten the crisis response elements right by communicating, taking care of safety needs. There does seem to be an opportunity in many organizations to focus on those psychological needs of listening, dialogue, and social support. And we need to think about every phase of this pandemic because at each phase, we're going to have to center on those three S's. So keep those in mind. I will stop sharing now and hand it back to John.
Great. Thank you, Patrick, very much. That was great. A lot of good data there. And I just will note to the folks watching that we will have these presentations available on novaeda.org, as well as this recorded session of the webinar itself. And I'll have certainly the webinar loaded by the end of today. Next, I'd like to speak or ask Agata Nguyen to speak. Agata is a director of people operations at the Humane League. And so here's someone who's on the front lines as an HR professional. And so I think this is a great balance of senior leadership, an expert in the research and the practices of HR, and then a practitioner at the moment. Agata leads the People Organizations Department, specializes in employee relations, performance management, leave and benefit administration, and other HR matters. Prior to joining the Humane League, Agata worked with both nonprofit and for-profit organizations. So please, Agata, if you take us through your slides as well.
Thank you so much, John. I'm going to share my screen now. Just confirm once you do see it.
It's coming. Yeah, there it is.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John, and also Alex for having me, and welcome everybody on the call. So as John stated, I am the Director of People Operations at the Humane League. And so just to give a little bit of background, the Humane League is a not-for-profit animal rights charity. We are a global organization, and so one of the big things that I guess we sort of had going for us is that we have been a 100% remote organization for the last 10 years. We have about 100 employees globally, about 80 now in the United States. And we've been around for about 15 years. 10 of those have been remote. And so I think in terms of some of the challenges that other employers are facing who have not had a remote workforce, one of the things I do want to share are some of the things that maybe have been working for us that others might find helpful. That's not to say that we haven't had our own challenges. Even though we are remote, we do have employees who were campaigners and organizers and activists, and we've had to pivot and move to a virtual settings for some of those in-person activities as well. So to kick things off, I just wanted to talk about working remotely in general. John mentioned in his opening remarks that the Gartner survey from April the 14th showed that about 81% of the US workforce is working remotely in some shape or form. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things. First one being challenges around infrastructure and tools to make working remotely effective. Obviously, there's a lot of components in here, especially as a small business. If you have never had employees working remotely and all of a sudden you want to be able to connect virtually, there may be a cost component of different tools to use, whether it's video conferencing, messaging, things of that nature. There are a lot of free tools, but then with some of those free tools, then you start to look at possibly data security issues. In line with that, if you had employees using desktops and now they're working remotely, are you going to be providing them with laptops? Are they going to be using their own devices and now you set up VPNs? And so all of that has had to happen so quickly for a lot of small businesses, not to mention then the training component if you implement new tools. Obviously we have a lot of tools in place, but we're also constantly innovating. And so the training piece is really critical. And then the actual usage, because it's one thing to invest in some of these tools and software, and another if now employees are anxious about the pandemic, now they're at home, they don't have childcare, and now they have all these tools that they're expected to use that maybe they're not entirely trained properly on how to use them. And so it just kind of snowballs into this one big issue. And so some of those tools at the end of my presentation, I do share them, some of the ones that I've used at my organization. Again, we are entirely virtual. Our culture within our organization is one in which we do video calls probably 99.9% of the call of the time. And that's just to ensure that person-to-person connection that we may not necessarily get through like picking up the phone and actually calling somebody. So we've built that into our culture. And I will say when I first started at the organization, it was a little bit weird to get on a video call, but now it's the norm. And so it actually feels odd to not do that. And so it's one way to also ensure that you bond with your staff a little bit more. You're able to see them more regularly, which kind of ties into the second point about actually managing remote workers. This is a challenge even within my organization, especially if we hire a new manager who has never worked remotely. And now they wonder how to build those relationships with their staff where you can't walk across the hall to somebody's office and just pop by. And so some of the things that we've built in with our organization are having weekly individual check-ins. Like it's a standing meeting every Wednesday at 10 a.m., for example. You meet with your direct reports. And so, and you do that individually so you can stagger them. I have 3 direct reports, and so I have one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, and then I have one with my supervisor on Mondays. And so we basically do that to maintain contact with each other, to keep up to date. This kind of ties into the supervising piece of, what is your staff doing? And then trusting that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing and being productive. We have milestone check-ins, and so if there is a project or something they're working on, that's part of that individual check-in of how are you doing on X project. And we've set a guideline that we do a check-in on projects at the 10% starting phase, halfway through, and then about 90% right before it goes final, just to make sure everybody's on the right page. But then also, so you're not micromanaging. I think that's one of the challenges, especially if you come from an organization where maybe telecommuting was not fully supported, and now you might feel like you got forced into this and you still don't support it. And is your staff actually working? The same could be said for somebody actually sitting in an office. Are they actually just sitting there, or are they working? And so with managing a remote workforce, like, the trust part is so important, and that check-in is what allows us to have that accountability with our staff to ensure that we're regularly staying up to date, and that the staff do feel engaged. It's one thing to have a manager who's very hands-off and you don't hear from them for a month, and I think you start to lose some of your morale if that happens. And so we really encourage that. The other thing is disciplining. It's an unfortunate part, and especially with the pandemic, we've also been very flexible in terms of engagement and productivity, especially at around this time. We have had a lot of staff openly state that they are feeling anxious and unproductive, and they're really struggling right now. And so we have offered tools and resources and been a little bit more flexible than normal. However, if there are performance issues, I don't encourage you to kind of sweep those under the rug and wait until the pandemic is over, because at the same time, we are not entirely sure how long this will go on. And if there is an issue, you should address it. And so, unfortunately, for a lot of you, that may be completely different in having to discipline somebody over the phone or through video. As long as that message is clear, that you have sufficient documentation, all those HR boxes are checked. I found that my transition from going to a non-remote workforce to a remote workforce, this was one of the more difficult things, especially worst case scenario if you have to do a termination, and the last thing you want to do is over the phone. But if it comes to that, I hope you all have support to help with those issues. And then the last part in here is about the need for social connection. And it's not just about only work. I think Manish mentioned this in terms of some of the things that they're doing to connect with staff, virtual happy hours. We have, our organization has what we call tea time twice a week for 30 minutes. And it's basically a person that leads that call. We have a culture committee in place, and somebody leads the call, and they have a couple of icebreakers, and you just hop on, and we don't talk about work. It's meant to be like a virtual water cooler, essentially, and we just chat and have a great time, or talk about what your plans are for the weekend. And it's a really good opportunity to just kind of catch your breath and not have to worry about.
To interrupt, we're a little short on time, so and by the way, to everybody, we'll have this deck on the website as well. So if you could advance it, because I want to get to questions. Apologies.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And so there's a lot of different options that you can do. Again, there's resources at the end of my presentation for you all to hop on. Quickly, the thing I wanted to touch on is the impacts that retaining, furloughing, or terminating employees may have on your business. In terms of retaining, there's creative solutions to be had for cutting costs elsewhere. Things like Some of the obvious ones are like hiring freezes, holding on pay increases. The other one that we've been seeing is suspending supplemental benefits, and what some of those things are, for example, are if you offered a subsidy for a gym membership, you may put that on hold in the interim. Maybe you offer childcare costs, and obviously most daycares are closed right now, and so maybe you hold on that. From the employer side, there's obviously the SBA Paycheck Protection Program for the employer to take advantage of. In regards to furloughing, one thing to note is that employees may be eligible for unemployment insurance. Again, it depends on the reduction of hours, and I encourage you to verify that with state law. They may also be eligible to continue coverage on the company's health plan while they're furloughed. Again, verify this with your plan documents because that will stipulate in there what that is. And then from the employer side, if you are going to furlough staff, it may cause an Affordable Care Act penalty for the employer. And this is something I encourage you to dive deep with either your HR team or if you have legal counsel. There are provisions in the ACA about 95% of your full-time staff must be offered coverage, and so if you furlough for long periods of time, that may impact that and impose a penalty, and those are pretty hefty. And then the last one is around terminating. Obviously, employees would be eligible for unemployment insurance and COBRA, but then from the employer side, you need to look at the true cost of terminating that employee. Do you have a formal severance plan or policy in place? If you're going to eventually rehire, then there's the added cost. Who's going to do those jobs while those employees are terminated? So all things to consider. And then in terms of restaffing, some of these things were mentioned, but obviously you may need to invest in infrastructure to support work, providing a safer environment. Encourage you to stay in touch with any staff you may have laid off in case you are ready to rehire and they're available. The other thing to note with the PPP program, that Paycheck Protection Program, is that if you're still under the terms of that program and you want to rehire, read those terms carefully because some of those loans don't allow you to rehire while you're still receiving that loan support. And so make sure you're taking a look at those with a fine-tooth comb. And so these are some of the things I would encourage you to focus on should the pandemic be prolonged. Obviously tools, staying up to date on HR matters. There's constantly evolving legislation coming out and guidance. Encourage you to review your current policies, specifically around sick and medical leave, telecommuting, as well as IT policies around the infrastructure data security part. Dust off your organization's succession plan. I've been having conversation with the leadership in my organization around what if one of you were to be diagnosed with COVID and was off for several weeks. What is our plan just in the interim? Keeping staff updated. Again, this was mentioned by Manish and also Patrick, especially since they might feel very alone right now, working remotely, not being around their peers. And then offer that flexibility and support for staff. This is an uncertain and anxious time for us all. And then things to expect in a post-COVID world. I think Manish touched on these as well, but physical distancing in offices, doing health checks and sanitizing. You may have to offer staggered work hours. You may have some employees that don't come back to the office. They may be permanently remote. There might be a more virtual culture in terms of interviewing and meetings. There may be travel restrictions, and then some business might even decide to convert to an entirely remote workforce because you start to think, I don't have to pay rent and utilities and some of those other overhead costs. And so finally, this is just a tool of resources. So you can take a look at these after this call, and then I also added in some of the working remotely tools that we use at our organization that have been very helpful. So thank you for that. John, I'll put it back to you.
Great, thanks, Agata. Great, so great content, everybody, really appreciate it. So I think before we go to questions, and by the way, to the folks listening, we are taking questions, Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and submit questions, and we'll get to them as well as we can. Let me just put my, there we go, good Q&A. One thing I wanted just to chat with the panelists about as we prep for these, a few questions here, the idea of redesigning a business for the post-COVID environment, and it sort of takes parts of all three of your presentations. On the staff side, we talked about remote working and adjusting the technologies required to successfully do that and meet the social needs. On the business model side, it's interesting. So if you have a retail operation or an operation that relied on a physical location, that's a lot of retooling, conceivably. And so I think I would start with, maybe Patrick, you could answer this question or tell me more about the idea of your third phase of retooling your business. I think your expression was redesign.
Yeah, just quickly, because I know we have limited time. You know, I think the first thing that we recommend to organizations is just a basic orientation using two basic concepts, which are obvious to all business leaders. The first is market demand, right? So some organizations are seeing increased market demand because of COVID-19. Others are seeing stable market demand, and then some are seeing declined market demand. So if you use that as a horizontal, you can see where your organization is. And then you need to think about where your workforce physically needs to be to get this work done. If you're in a grocery store, you're seeing a spike in business, and your workforce needs to be in the grocery store. And so what you need to solve for really are creative ways to service customers and keep your workforce safe. Now, that's going to be much different than if you're seeing decreased demand and your workforce is remote. If that's the case, you really need to think about innovation. What are some new ways that we can work with our clients and prospects? What are new ways to win business? So limited time, so I can't go into more detail, but really understanding where your workforce is from a demand perspective and an employee workforce perspective can start to orient you towards strategies to consider. The one other thing I'll add, I know we're out of time or running out of time, or there are other comments, but really taking a look at what your organization has done, how you've responded, doing an after action or after or pandemic review or initial phase is a good way to learn.
And Manish, as a CEO, when you talk about, and for everyone, but Manish, the balance, because I can imagine the fear. We had one question actually here, and I'll just paraphrase the question. If I may. I work in a small office, 5 employees. We've been working at home since mid-March, currently scheduled to do so through Memorial Day. However, my boss keeps stating that we, the company, are not really impacted by the stay-at-home piece, et cetera. And this individual is concerned about getting on public transportation, going to an office environment where they really don't have, the individual doesn't have control. So Manish, you've done a lot of work in this regard. So is it the balance between the imperative of returning to a physical office environment and assuaging the concerns of the employees? And if push comes to shove, which way do you go on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, in the situation we are in, we will have to listen to the employees, right? Even if let's say there is no issues with the traveling in local transportation and all, but then there are also some dependent issues, like the schools are off now for the whole year, so there are children at home, and you know what, child cares are not working. So we as employers will have to think through a lot before saying, no, you need to get back to work, or we need to be a little more considerate about it. So in short, that's what I would say. The employers really need to think through all these as they build their returning to work guides and everything.
And it's interesting, maybe Alex, I could ask you to jump in here. The disproportionality of the unemployment, and I think Patrick, you mentioned this as well. So you have a rolling survey that showed 5%, I think it was concern over layoffs, or we're experiencing significant layoffs. And that's rolling, I understand, from January till now. But if you think about, whether it's Fairfax County or another Northern Virginia county, there is a lot of unemployment on the services side, right? Whether it's restaurants and even concerns about transportation. What are we doing, perhaps at the Fairfax County level, to remedy that? Are there statewide programs on? We talked last week about financing from the state of Commonwealth of Virginia. But are there programs that the counties are leading that might help the concern about getting back to work? You're on mute, actually. If you're just, yeah.
Sorry, I got comfortable there on my mute button. I think the first thing that you're seeing from the local jurisdictions is helping to connect businesses who can still supply a product from that place of work without actually having customers in that space. And so it's keeping them, keeping as much revenue as possible flowing through those businesses so that they have some stability to work with when it's time to bring employees back to work or it's time to rehire. And one of the things that we're looking at right now is what does that reemployment phase look like, and what kinds of time periods or stages will that occur? And as you mentioned, we'll actually be seeing the return of the hospitality and services sectors, but at what rate and by what types of employers are most adversely affected, and to what extent will consumer demand for those services return over the next 12 and even 24 months as we get back to what we knew before in terms of a 2% unemployment rate. I don't know that we'll ever be there again. But when you talk about us being now in the low teens, we're in a dramatically different environment. We need to be doing everything that we can as jurisdictions to help these businesses weather through this transition and crisis, and so that they can be as ready as they possibly can when customers are ready to go back out there.
And I know we're over time, but I want to maybe, Patrick, ask you a question, and this may be your wheelhouse, I don't know. But we think about displacement of unemployment. So if some of these companies, sectors are taking huge structural changes, airlines, conceivably, that's going to be continue to be a massively impacted sector. Retraining and repositioning labor to other sectors. Do you have any comments or observations about that?
The only thing I would say is we had to do that anyway, right? So as you think about this fourth industrial revolution, as you think about AI and robots coming online, we were talking about this pre-pandemic. And so I think that what this is going to do is just speed up the retraining, the upskilling that needs to happen. And hopefully, I do think ultimately, once we get through this, it will be a good thing for all of us because there is this new economy that is coming, and it really is going to require different skill sets.
Interesting. Well, we are unfortunately out of time, folks. I'm just going to point, if I may, to sort of the my closing slides, and I want to tee up for next week. This time, Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, will be the next webinar in this series, and entitled "Keeping My Customers and Finding New Ones in This Climate." Business climate is obviously what I'm referring to there. So that's next Tuesday, May 14th at 2 p.m. And you can find this webinar plus 3 previous webinars and the compendium of them over time on novaeda.org. And that's it. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to those folks watching, and look forward to having you next week join us for the next webinar. Thanks very much, everyone.